Sharpening your image is one of the most important parts of the image editing workflow. In this video, I'm going to show you a few great tips and tricks on how to sharpen your images and also how to boost colors and tones. I'm going to talk you through several different stages in a sharpening workflow, but you don't necessarily need to use every single stage on every single image. You can pick and choose which techniques are right for your particular image. We're also going to look at a few great new sharpening features in Photoshop CC and see how we can sharpen while also keeping noise to a minimum. So I'm going to start by opening my image here into Camera Raw. So I'm going to right click it here in Bridge and choose Open in Camera Raw, and it'll pop open in the Camera Raw interface. And I'm going to make a few quick tweaks to the tones here just in the basic panel on the right. I'm going to start just by upping the contrast slightly just to add a little bit of punch. We'll bring that up to about +15, and then let's go down to the shadows and just lift the darkest tone slightly. We'll bring that up again to about +15, +16, that's fine. Let's up the clarity just to give the image a bit more punch and crispness. I'm just going to bring that up to about +10. And I'm also going to boost the colours, so I'm going to bring the saturation up to about +18. If I toggle my preview on or off, you can see that just helps to lift the image and give those colours a bit more zing. Now I'm going to go to the detail panel, which is the third one in here from the left, and you see we have a set of sharpening and noise reduction sliders. I'm going to use these to perform the initial stage in my sharpening workflow, and this is sometimes referred to as capture sharpening. It's where we're going to add a touch of sharpness to correct the inherent softness that you find in raw files. So I'm going to start by double clicking my zoom tool, and this will quickly jump into 100% view, and then I can hold the space bar and drag to move around the image to get to a point where I can see the eye here. Now I'm going to start over here with the amount and radius sliders. The amount slider will control the overall strength of the sharpening effect, and just to exaggerate this, I'm going to drag it right across to 150, and you'll see how that tries to sharpen up the image. In fact, it's gone way too far. And then if I drag the radius slider across, you'll see how what this does is increase the area in which the sharpening occurs. Sharpening works by increasing contrast along edges, so any parts like around here where you have a dark edge meeting a light edge, what sharpening does is just increase the contrast, so the darker part gets darker and the lighter part gets lighter. This is why if you push it too far you begin to see halos in your image. So I'm going to drag these two sliders back down to a more acceptable value. I think if we just bring the radius around about 1.4. You usually want to keep radius between about 0.8 and about 1.8, somewhere around about there. And then I think amount is okay, about 67. Again, with amount you probably want to keep it between 50 and 150 usually. But of course all of these settings are dependent on your image, in particular the resolution and the subject matter. Now if I scroll across here to my soft background, you'll see the effect my sharpening has had on my soft background here, where we've actually managed to increase the amount of noise in the background or make the noise more grainy, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to use the masking slider to correct that. First of all, I'm just going to double click my hand tool, which will bring me back out to my full screen view, and now I'm going to hold Alt and drag my masking slider. And as I drag while holding Alt, you'll see parts of the image begin to show up in black. And these parts are going to be masked from my sharpening effect. So I obviously want to mask my soft background from any of that sharpening. So I'm going to drag the masking up to about somewhere around about 40, I think, just so we're able to mask the sharpening from my nice soft background. And then if I just quickly zoom back into 100%, and let's have a look at that background again, you'll see that noise is much less apparent now. In fact, if I just reset my masking, you'll see that's the before and that's the after. So the masking is having a real difference on the overall image noise. It's not completely eradicated the noise, but I'm going to use some tools in Photoshop to do that in a little bit. So I'm finished with Camera Raw now. I'm going to click Open Image to open into Photoshop. Now I'm going to go to Window Layers to access my Layers panel, then right click the background layer and choose Convert to Smart Objects, and I'm doing this because this means that any filters I apply are going to be non-destructive. So I'm going to go to my filter menu now, and we'll go down to Sharpen and choose Smart Sharpen. Now I can drag the corner of the Smart Sharpen box here to make it larger, just to help when judging the settings. And over here we have an amount and radius slider similar to the controls in Camera Raw. But we also have a reduce noise slider, and this is new to Photoshop CC's version of the Smart Sharpen filter. And this means that we can add sharpening while at the same time keeping noise in check. So I've got some settings I've worked out. I'm going to set the amount to about 110, somewhere around about there, 103, that's fine. We'll bring the radius up slightly to 1.4. And if I just mouse down over the image here, you can see a quick preview of before and after of those settings. In fact, let's just drag over to the head over here. So you can see the change is quite subtle, but it certainly makes a difference. Now I'm going to bring my reduced noise slider down slightly to about 30% just to soften the noise in the background. And you can see I also have shadows and highlight sliders here to control the amount of sharpening in different parts of the tonal range. And I have my shadows fade amount set to 65%. And this will mean that we're not applying as much sharpening in the shadows. And this is quite useful because shadows are particularly prone to noise when compared to highlights. So by upping the fade amount, we can reduce the amount of sharpening in the shadows. Now I'm happy with that, so I'm going to hit OK to apply. And you can see in my layers panel here how the Smart Sharpen appears as a smart filter, and this gives us the option to restrict the filter in certain areas by painting on the mask here. I can just highlight the mask thumbnail and then I can zoom in. I'm just holding the control key and my space bar and dragging to the right to zoom in. That's control if you're using Windows, or command if you're using a Mac. If I hold that on the space bar I can zoom in or out by dragging. So I'm going to zoom in close to the eye here. And let's say I want to restrict the Smart Sharpen over the eyeball where I think it's working a little bit too strongly. I can simply grab the brush tool, set my foreground colour to black, and I can just use the left and right square bracket keys on my keyboard to resize my brush tip, and then I can paint with black over that eyeball to restrict the Smart Sharpen effect in that area. And you can see how that little area appears on my mask thumbnail here as black. Now if we just scroll across to the background here, I can see we still have quite a lot of noise showing up, and I'm going to use the Camera Raw filter now to reduce the noise even further. First of all, I'm going to duplicate my layer with Command or Control and J to give me another copy. You see there's my copy. And now I'm going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and this is only available if you're using Photoshop CC. And what it does is allow me to return to Camera Raw to apply my noise reduction. So I'm going to go to the Detail panel again, and let's just double click the zoom tool there to zoom in, and we'll move over to the background again. And this time I'm going to up the noise reduction luminance to a point where that noise in the nice smooth background will disappear. So I think somewhere around about 40 or 50 will work. And as you can see, this is smoothing out my background. In fact, if I just zoom in even closer and I'll toggle the preview on or off, you can see that's the before and that's the after. So we're getting a much smoother background, but we're also losing some of the detail in the bird here, which is not what I want. So I'm going to use a layer mask to restrict the effect again. So I'm going to hit OK to apply. And now I can add a layer mask to my layer just by clicking this little icon here. And this works in much the same way as my Smart Filter mask. I can simply paint with black or white to hide or reveal parts of that layer. So let's just zoom out a little bit. And then once again, I'm going to grab my brush tool, set my color to black. And I can just start painting over my bird to hide that noise reduction in these areas. And again, I'm using the left and right square bracket keys on my keyboard to resize my brush tip as I paint. And I don't need to be too precise about this. I'm going to keep it quite loose and quite quick. So you can see in this way we're able to restrict both sharpening and noise reduction to certain areas of our image by using either Smart Filter masks or normal layer masks. Another great tool for applying sharpening selectively is the Sharpen tool, and we can use this on a separate layer. So I'm just going to click the Create New Layer icon here at the bottom of the Layers panel to give me a new empty layer. And let's just rename that layer Sharpen Tool, and then we'll grab the tool from the toolbar over here. Now, in earlier versions of Photoshop, the Sharpen tool was one to be avoided, but it's been much improved in later versions from CS5 onwards with this option here to protect detail, and now it's become a much more useful tool, and we can use it to paint over areas of our image if we want to sharpen them up. If we have sample all layers checked, it means that we can paint on our empty layer while sampling from all of those layers below, and you'll see if I just paint around some of the feathers here, how we're able to sharpen up these details. We want to keep the strength fairly low, somewhere around about 10% is fine. I'm just going to paint over some of these edges around the eye here and some of these little details here. It just helps to emphasize them. And you can see how these different paint marks are appearing quite faintly on their own layer. In fact, if I just alt-click the eye icon there, we can hide all of the other layers, and you can see quite faintly the areas that I've painted over. So the Sharpen tool is definitely one to experiment with if you want to selectively sharpen certain areas of your image while keeping the rest of the image, like the background here, nice and soft. Now I'm going to move on from sharpening to show you how you can get incredibly rich colours, which is perfect for images like this. Let's just zoom back out to full screen, and we're going to use lab colour for this. First of all, we need to create a merged copy of all of our layers, and we can do this with a quick keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control, Shift, Alt and E. So Command or Control, Shift, Alt and E will give you a merged copy of all of those layers, and I'm just going to rename this layer Colour Boost. And once again, I'm going to right click the layer and choose Convert to Smart Object. And then I can double click the thumbnail here, which will open this layer in its own separate window. So now we can treat this Smart Object layer like a separate image really. And I'm going to go to Image Mode and Lab Color to convert to the Lab Color mode. And then I'm going to go to my Create Adjustment layer icon here in the Layers panel and choose Levels. And you can see in my channel drop down here we have the lightness, the A and the B channels. The lightness will control all of the detail in the image, while A and B control the colours. So I'm going to select the A channel, and I want to drag these two sliders here, the bottom left slider and the bottom right slider, in by equal amounts. I can do that using the boxes here. So I'm going to input 25 into the bottom left box, and you see that drags that slider inwards. And note how that's just shifted my colours slightly. I can balance it out by dragging the white point slider inwards by the exact same amount. So I need to do some simple math here. We'll minus 25 from 255, which gives us 230. And you'll see how that drags my white point slider in by the same amount as my black point slider. And notice that has a dramatic effect on the colours in the image if I just toggle that layer on and off. Now I'm going to do a similar thing on the B channel. But this time I'm going to bring the sliders in by slightly less. I'm just going to go for 15 and 240. Because this B channel controls the greens in the image, and I don't want to overpower the greens in the background too much. If I toggle that layer on or off, you can see how that's working on my colours. But I think perhaps it's slightly too strong, and I can tone it down just by lowering the layer opacity. So I'm going to bring it down to about 80%. Now I can click the X icon here to close down that window, and I want to save it. And then we can go back to our original image. And now if we want, we can add a layer mask to this layer to tone down the effect in certain areas. If we just zoom in slightly closer onto the breast here, you can see how we're losing some of those nice delicate oranges around this area. So I'm going to add a layer mask and simply paint with black again to bring those areas back. So I think just a couple of clicks will do it, and that's looking much better. And let's just zoom back out for a final look at our image. And I think there's one other thing I'm going to do, which is add a slight vignette to darken down the corners. And again, I can do this using the Camera Raw filter. So I'm going to hit Command or Control, Shift, Alt and E again to merge another copy. Again, right click and we'll convert to Smart Object. And then let's go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. And we'll grab the radial filter tool from the toolbar over here, and I'm just going to drag a circle over the main part of the bird here. I can hold space while I'm dragging to reposition my circle, so I'll get it somewhere about there, I think. And then I can use the settings over here to adjust the area outside of my circle. So I'm just going to double click these settings here to bring them back to their original values, and I'm just going to drag exposure back slightly to darken down those corners of the frame. I think somewhere around about minus 0.4 will do it, and then I can hit OK to apply that. So that's my finished image, and there we have it. A few great tips and tricks for sharpening, reducing noise and boosting colour and tone.